So, the effect of an audience, which is a topic that's quite often called social facilitation, but we need to also know what social facilitation means and the opposite concept of social inhibition. So what do we need to know? We need to know those two, facilitation and inhibition. And then there are a few theories as usual. We'll look at evaluation apprehension, Barron's distraction conflict theory, as well as the home field advantage and strategies. How do we cope with an audience? So, what happens to sport and performance when others are present? Well, I think it's fair to say that sometimes things are good and performance is improved, and we would call this social facilitation. This is good. This is when the audience has a positive impact and performance improves. However, an audience can have a negative effect as well, and we call this social inhibition. So this is where people crumble under the pressure of an audience and they play worse. Just be aware that there are definitions of social facilitation that really is just the audience effect, and it's not taking into account that social facilitation is an improvement in performance. So you can see this definition here by Zion is a general definition, and sometimes questions on the exam paper will also refer to social facilitation as the topic title, so just be aware of that. You can see from this early study by Triplett that it's one of the first topics to be studied in sports psychology, social psychology, and it was a fairly straightforward experiment that showed that cyclists went quicker with other people present. So Zion came up with this model, and this is a really important model for this topic. It's one that you need to know the different parts of. So Zion says there's two types of other people that can have an effect: passive and interactive. And he suggests that interactive others, which can be competitive co-actors, are social reinforcers, that they don't really have an effect in terms of an audience effect. So the competitive co-actors are the people who you are competing against, and your social reinforcers would normally be like your coach or parent or someone who's always there. So basically these people are usually there, always there. There might be different people at different times, but they will be there. So these are just people who are there, who we expect to be there, and that's nothing different in terms of an audience effect. So therefore, Zion says that it's these people over here, that if an audience or co-actors who have some sort of audience effect. So an audience is obviously people who are there watching. Those people aren't always there, so when they are there, they will have some sort of audience effect. And co-actors are people who are taking part in the same activity at the same time, so they again might not always be there. So just for example, if you're playing in a badminton competition, on one court there may be some co-actors who are co-acting in the same badminton competition on the next court alongside you, who are there maybe looking at certain times and therefore can have an audience effect. The rest of the theory, this bottom bit, is basically drive theory. So if we remember drive theory, then we know Zion's model. So it says that an increase in arousal leads to an increased probability of the dominant response occurring. So, and we know that dominant response, that we're going to look at two examples for that it's incorrect for novices, but the dominant response is correct for experts. Therefore, according to Zion, if we look at the dominant response, then novices' performance in front of an audience will be impaired, social inhibition, and experts' performances in front of an audience will be facilitated. Social facilitation, they'll perform better. So there have been questions in the past on the paper that have expected you to know the different parts of that model. The drive theory bit, but also the 4 boxes, the 4 types of people that we outlined before, the audience, etc., social reinforcers. So the other way we can look at Zion's model, as well as the experts will perform better and novices will perform worse, is the type of task. So we introduced the type of task, and basically we're looking at a simple or well-learned task. We will get better performance. So we looked at, like, for example, the cyclist before, better performance, but with a more complex task, or a task that I'm just starting to learn, then maybe I will have impaired performance, social inhibition. This is backed up from various research studies. So you can see here that simple muscular endurance tasks improved performance with an audience, whereas complex tasks impaired performance. So a different theory is evaluation apprehension, and Cottrell argued that it's not just the presence of others that creates arousal, and that actually it can have quite a calming effect. So Cottrell was talking about the fact that it's about evaluation. Really, are you being judged? And if you're being judged, you will have some apprehension, some nerves, some anxiety potentially, due to that evaluation, that being judged. So have a think about what audiences are likely to make you apprehensive. So I'm sure you're thinking that it could potentially be a knowledgeable audience, one that knows what they're talking about, knows what they're looking for. It could be that it's your home audience, the one, because they are going to be looking at your team and not the away team primarily. So things like that can have an effect here. It could be that it's a scout in the crowd that's evaluating you for maybe a national team or something like that, or even your parents or close people to you. If you know they're in the crowd, then you may get evaluation apprehension. Now, as normal, this could produce social facilitation or social inhibition, and it would just be the overall positive or negative situation from the person, which effect that would have. So the need to achieve person, the highly self-confident person, the low anxiety person will have likely a positive effect with this evaluation apprehension, but the need to avoid failure person might just suffer from social inhibition. Distraction conflict theory, so you can see it's a more recent theory, and the recent research has focused on cognitive parts to the audience, and particularly attention. Now, we know a little bit about attention from last year, so have a think about what we know about attention from AS. So I'm hoping that you're thinking about selective attention and the fact that we can only really concentrate on one thing at a time, and that we're not very good at concentrating on lots of things at a time. So when we're performing, basically we need to be fully concentrating on our performance, on the processes that we're going through in order to perform well. And the crowd could be competition for our attention. It may distract us. So in other words, we've got some distraction, conflict. We've got conflict in what we're trying to attend to. We should be attending to our sport, but maybe we can't help being distracted by the crowd. So what type of crowd might do this? Well, this is more likely to be an away crowd. Away crowds are pretty good at trying to distract the away team, so this might be an effect here. So this brings us on to the concept of home advantage. A question may ask, is there a home advantage? And the basic answer is yes, there is. Research shows that there is a home advantage, and this is gathered over many years of statistics on different games. You can see here that there's lots of research that comes from America. So you can see that, like, with lots of games, taking into account thousands of games here, that yeah, there is a home advantage. Now obviously in America they don't tend to have many draws, but still 60%, 64, 53% of home teams win. So it's shown that basically home teams win more often than they lose. This research found that it was offensive play, so attacking play was improved when they play at home, and that the audience had an impact on them. Some more research around basketball, and they found that basketball home teams displayed what they call functional assertive behaviour. In other words, they did the physical bit well, so things in basketball like steals and block shots and rebounds, whereas away teams displayed dysfunctional, bad for you, aggressive behaviour. So they became more aggressive, committed more fouls, had people out of the game, etc. And Varka concluded that it was the audience, again, that increased the arousal, that facilitated those physical skills, and that the away players were frustrated by the crowd and the distractions of the crowd, which linked into frustration aggression theory. So there are quite a few factors that can influence performance in front of an audience. So think about the size of the crowd and the size of the stadium. How might that affect performance? Well, obviously there's going to be a more of an impact with a bigger crowd and more of an impact with the size of the stadium. However, if you think about how full is that stadium, so if we've got a relatively, it might be a large crowd, but it might be in a massive stadium and it might not be full. So a smaller stadium that is full might have more of an impact. This links in a little bit with the hostility of the crowd. So how hostile are the crowd? How loud are they, etc. Proximity. So there's such a thing called the proximity effect. How close is the crowd? So something like the basketball game here, you get courtside seats, so a basketball crowd would be very proximal, very close to the action. And if you remember the stats from before, basketball had a higher win percentage for the teams at home. Is that to do with the proximity effect? Could be to do with the performer's age, knowledge, or personality. And also the status of the observers. So, as mentioned before, if it's a knowledgeable crowd, that might have more of an impact. The stage of competition is also a big one for home advantage. It's shown that in regular season, that again, most of the research comes from America, regular season games, that there is quite a large home advantage. However, once we get into the American playoff system, for example, or the later stages of competitions, there is less of a home advantage, and even sometimes there can be a home disadvantage. Now this would be attributed to the pressure of those situations, and obviously the pressure from the crowd on the players, etc. So what can we do then? What can the coach do to cope with audience effects? It might be that we need to block out the crowd, so work on our selective attention. To do this, we might use some imagery, mental rehearsal, so we know how to do that, either blocking things out, imagining you're somewhere else, going through your routine, etc. I can work on Zion's theory of dominant response. So if I overlearn my skill, if it's really well grooved and well learned. My dominant response comes through in those high arousal situations in front of a crowd. I could practice with an audience, gradually increase the number, so I might start with just a few people, and build it up to get up to larger crowds eventually. Use of my stress management techniques, so it might be my muscular relaxation, breathing techniques, etc. Attributions, so it's whether we attribute success or failure to the crowd. A home game, an away game. Alright, is it alright to lose away from home? Is that okay to attribute a loss to that? Or should we be looking at it shouldn't matter? I can reduce the importance of the event in front of the crowd, alright, because obviously the crowd can build up more pressure. So if I can just try to focus on the processes and it's just another game, that could be helpful. Avoiding social comparison with others, so again thinking about your own performance and less ego orientation, and coaching a non-evaluative environment initially, so I might not put them in front of that evaluative environment in front of a crowd, etc. if I'm the coach, and I might build that in gradually. As usual, we focus on the performance, not the outcome, and that's linked in already to a couple of the others that I've talked about. Obviously, focusing on the outcome with the crowd present, more pressure from the outcome, more pressure from the crowd. That could be a bad mix, lead to anxiety. And offer some praise and some positive feedback.